"You're not a pig, you're beautiful." Mountain Man bought her freedom from wooden cage. The stench of unwashed bodies and rotting vegetables clung to the air in Blackwater Ridge's town square that autumn afternoon in 1876. A crowd had gathered around the traveling carnival's main attraction, a wooden cage barely large enough for a grown person to stand upright, its bars stained dark with age and misery. Inside sat Maribel Lane, 23 years old and hollow-eyed, wearing a tattered pink dress that had once been beautiful. The barker, a rail-thin man with a top hat and grotesque smile, bellowed to the assembled onlookers, "Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Behold the pig woman of Sacramento, half human, half swine, a freak of nature captured from the wild hills of California." The crowd roared with laughter as someone hurled a rotten apple through the bars. It struck Maribel's shoulder, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged them. Instead, she forced her lips into a smile, the same smile that had kept her alive for the past 8 months, the smile that said she was in on the joke, even as her soul crumbled to dust. A child pointed at her, shrieking with delight. "Mama, look at the fat pig lady!" Maribel kept smiling. Always smile. Smile or they beat you. Smile or they withhold food. Smile or the ringmaster comes at night with his leather strap and reminds you that you're lucky to be alive at all. The crowd began to disperse as the barker moved to promote the bearded lady in the next tent. Maribel sat in her cage, surrounded by dirty straw and the remnants of food that had been thrown at her throughout the day. Her fingers traced the carved marks on the wooden bars. 143 days since they'd taken her freedom. 143 days since she'd been tricked by a handsome man in Sacramento who'd promised her work in a respectable household, only to deliver her to this nightmare. She'd been mocked for her appearance her entire life, but nothing compared to this systematic humiliation. At least before, she'd had a small room above a bakery, a place to cry in private. Now, even her tears belonged to the crowd. As twilight descended on Blackwater Ridge, Maribel noticed a man standing apart from the dispersing crowd. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long gray hair and a beard that covered most of his weathered face. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, giving him a fearsome appearance. He wore buckskin and fur, the clothing of someone who lived far from civilization. His eyes, pale blue and intense, remained fixed on her cage. Maribel felt exposed under his gaze, but there was something different in his expression. Not disgust, not amusement. Something else entirely that she couldn't identify. After several long minutes, he turned and walked toward the carnival owner's wagon. She watched him go, her heart beating strangely fast. Something about the set of his shoulders, the deliberate way he moved, suggested purpose. Elias Crow hadn't set foot in a proper town in 3 years. He came down from Black Peak Mountain twice annually for supplies, flour, salt, ammunition, tobacco, and returned to his solitary cabin as quickly as possible. Human company held no appeal. He'd forfeited his right to such comforts the day he failed to protect his family. But something stopped him as he passed the carnival. The jeering crowd, the cruel laughter, the visible pain in the young woman's eyes despite her forced smile, it all struck something deep in his chest, a place he'd thought had calcified beyond feeling. He recognized that look. It was the same expression he'd seen in his own mirror for 15 years, the look of someone who'd accepted that they deserved suffering. The carnival owner, a corpulent man named Horace Blackwood sat in his wagon counting the day's earnings when Elias climbed the steps. Blackwood looked up with practiced friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. "Help you, friend? Show's over for the night, but we'll be here through—" "The woman in the cage," Elias interrupted, his voice rough from disuse. "I want to buy her freedom." Blackwood's expression shifted to calculating interest. "She's one of my best attractions. Brought her all the way from California. Cost me considerable." "Name your price." The carnival owner leaned back, studying Elias with new appreciation. "Well, now, that's a valuable commodity you're asking about. She brings in crowds, sells tickets. I'd need substantial compensation to part with such an investment." Elias reached into his coat and produced a leather pouch. He emptied its contents onto the table, gold nuggets, each the size of a thumbnail, gleaming in the lamplight. Blackwood's eyes widened. "There's more where that came from," Elias said quietly. "Enough to buy your best 3 attractions. I only want her." "Want? For what purpose?" Blackwood asked, unable to hide his greed as he stared at the gold. "That's my business. Do we have an agreement or not?" Blackwood reached for the gold, but Elias's hand shot out, gripping the carnival owner's wrist with surprising strength. The older man's voice was deadly calm. "One condition. You never speak of this transaction to anyone. You tell your people she died of fever, ran away, whatever story you prefer, but you don't come looking for her, ever. Understood?" The cold promise in Elias's eyes convinced Blackwood more than any threat. He nodded quickly. "Understood. She's all yours, friend. Hell, she's been more trouble than she's worth anyway. Cries at night. Upsets the other performers." Elias released his grip, letting Blackwood scoop up the gold. "One more thing. She's not an it. She's a person. Now get me the keys to that cage." As they walked across the carnival grounds, Blackwood made obsequious small talk that Elias ignored. The few remaining carnival workers watched curiously as they approached Maribel's cage. She dozed off, sitting against the bars, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. When Blackwood rattled the keys, she startled awake, instinctively pulling back into the corner of her cage. Her eyes darted between the 2 men, fear replacing the hollow resignation Elias had seen earlier. "Good news, my dear," Blackwood announced with false cheer. "You've been purchased. This gentleman has kindly agreed to take you off my hands. You're a lucky girl." The color drained from Maribel's face. She looked at Elias with terror in her eyes, and he realized what she must be thinking, that she'd been sold to some mountain recluse for purposes she dared not imagine. "I'm not buying a person," Elias said firmly, directing his words to Maribel rather than Blackwood. "I'm buying your freedom. You're coming with me away from here, and you'll be safe. That's all." Blackwood unlocked the cage, and Maribel emerged slowly, her legs cramping from months of confinement. She was perhaps 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark brown hair tangled and unwashed, and eyes the color of honey. Despite her fear, despite her circumstances, Elias could see strength in her, something unbroken despite every attempt to crush her spirit. "Can you walk?" Elias asked gently. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. We have a long journey ahead. Do you have any belongings?" Blackwood snorted. "Everything she needs is on her back." Elias shot him a look that silenced any further commentary. He removed his heavy fur coat and held it out to Maribel. "The nights get cold in the mountains. You'll need this." She stared at the coat as if it might be a trap, but the autumn evening was indeed chilly, and her thin dress provided no warmth. She took it slowly, wrapping it around herself. It swallowed her small frame entirely. "Thank you," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken. Her voice was hoarse from months of breathing in straw dust and yelling to be heard over hostile crowds. "Let's go," Elias said. "We want to make it past the ridge before full dark." As they walked away from the carnival, Maribel glanced back once at the cage that had been her entire world for nearly half a year. Then she turned her face forward, toward the unknown, toward the mountains, silhouetted against the darkening sky, toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. They walked in silence through the outskirts of Blackwater Ridge, past the last of the ramshackle buildings that served as homes and businesses for the rough frontier town. Elias's horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Buck, waited where he'd tethered it outside the general store. Supplies were already loaded: flour, salt, coffee, and other essentials that would last him through winter. Maribel stopped when she saw the horse, uncertainty crossing her face. "Have you ridden before?" Elias asked. She shook her head. I've lived in cities my whole life. Sacramento, then San Francisco for a while." "How did you end up with the carnival?" Her expression shuttered closed. "I'd rather not speak of it, if that's all right." Elias nodded. "Fair enough. We've all got our ghosts. Here, I'll help you up." He boosted her onto Buck's back, then swung up behind her. Maribel tensed at the proximity, her body rigid as a board. "Easy," Elias said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just hold on to the saddle horn. It's a 3-hour ride to my cabin, and the trail gets steep." As they began the ascent into the Black Peak Mountains, the last light faded from the sky. Maribel had never seen such darkness. In the cities, there were always lamps, always people, always some source of light. Here, the forest closed around them like a living thing, and only the moon provided illumination. The sounds terrified her: the rustle of unseen animals, the crack of branches, the distant howl of what could only be wolves. She'd heard stories about what happened to women who went into the wilderness with strange men, about cabins far from help where screams went unheard. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the directness. Elias was quiet for a long moment. "No." "Are you going to hurt me? Use me?" "No." "Then why did you pay for my freedom? What do you want from me?" Elias guided Buck around a fallen log before answering. "I saw you in that cage, smiling while they threw garbage at you, and I thought about how much strength it takes to survive something like that. I thought about how no one deserves to be treated as less than human, no matter what they look like or where they come from. And I thought about how I have a warm cabin, plenty of food, and more space than one person needs. So I bought your freedom because I could, and because it was the right thing to do." "Nobody does something for nothing," Maribel said bitterly. "There's always a price." "The price was the gold I paid that bastard Blackwood, nothing more." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But experience had taught her that kindness was always a mask for something uglier underneath. They rode in silence for another hour. Despite her fear, exhaustion began to overtake Maribel. She'd slept poorly in the cage, always cold, always alert for the next indignity. Now, wrapped in Elias's warm coat, listening to the steady rhythm of Buck's hooves, she felt her eyes growing heavy. Her head nodded forward, jerking her awake. It happened twice more before she finally surrendered to sleep, leaning back against Elias's chest without conscious thought. When she woke, moonlight was streaming through a clearing, and they'd stopped in front of a sturdy log cabin built against the mountainside. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear the rustle of animals. Chickens, maybe, or goats. "We're here," Elias said. "This is home." He dismounted and helped her down. Her legs barely supported her weight after the long ride, and she would have fallen if he hadn't steadied her with a firm hand on her elbow. "There's a guest room inside," he said, leading Buck toward the barn. "Get yourself warm by the fire. I'll tend to the horse and be in shortly." Maribel stood uncertainly by the cabin door. This could still be a trap. He could still be lying about everything. But what choice did she have? Where would she go if she ran? Back to Blackwater Ridge, where the carnival waited? Into the wilderness, where wolves prowled? She pushed open the door. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well kept. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire burning low in the grate. Handcrafted furniture filled the space, a solid wooden table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair beside the hearth. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, supplies, and various tools. Everything was clean and organized, the home of someone who took pride in their surroundings despite their isolation. A door to the left stood ajar, revealing a small bedroom with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt. Maribel walked to it slowly, touching the quilt with trembling fingers. When was the last time she'd slept in an actual bed? She heard Elias enter the main room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. She turned to find him adding wood to the fire. "That's your room," he said without looking at her. "I sleep in the loft above. There's a wash basin with clean water, and I'll heat more in the morning so you can properly bathe. You'll find night clothes in the chest at the foot of the bed. They belong to someone else, but they'll do until I can get you proper things. Food's in the pantry if you're hungry. Help yourself to anything you need." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Maribel whispered. Elias finally looked at her, his scarred face cast in shadow by the firelight. "Because someone should have been long before now. Get some rest, Miss Lane. Maribel Lane." "Miss Lane, tomorrow we'll talk about rules and expectations. For tonight, just know that you're safe here. I give you my word." He climbed the ladder to the loft, and Maribel heard him moving around above her head. She stood in the middle of the main room for a long time, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to come back down with different intentions, but he didn't. Eventually, she went into the small bedroom and closed the door. The nightgown in the chest was soft cotton, worn but clean. As Maribel changed into it, she caught sight of herself in a small mirror mounted on the wall. The face that looked back was almost unrecognizable. Her cheeks hollowed out from insufficient food, her skin marked with small bruises and scratches from the cage, her eyes haunted. But underneath all of that, she could still see traces of who she'd been before the cage, before the carnival, before life had taught her that her worth was measured by others' cruelty. She slipped into the bed, and the luxury of a real mattress, clean sheets, and a warm quilt nearly brought her to tears. For the first time in 8 months, Maribel Lane slept without fear. Morning came slowly to Black Peak Mountain. Maribel woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of coffee. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in her room above the bakery in Sacramento, that everything, the betrayal, the cage, the endless humiliation, had been just a nightmare? Then she remembered where she was. She dressed quickly in her tattered carnival dress, the only clothing she owned, and emerged from the bedroom to find Elias standing at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He'd shaved his beard shorter, and in the morning light she could see that he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 50s, with deep lines around his eyes and gray threading through his hair. "Morning," he said without turning around. "There's coffee on the table. Hope you like venison stew for breakfast. I'm not much for variety in cooking." Maribel poured herself coffee, marveling at the simple act of having something warm to drink from a real cup. "Thank you." They sat across from each other at the table, and Maribel noticed that Elias kept his eyes down, never staring at her the way others did. He ate methodically, efficiently, like someone accustomed to eating alone. "We should discuss arrangements," he said finally. "I brought you here to give you freedom and safety, but that doesn't mean charity without dignity. If you're willing, there's work that needs doing. I could use help with the vegetable garden, the chickens, preserving food for winter. I can teach you to fish and hunt if you're interested. In exchange, you have a home, food, and protection." "That sounds fair," Maribel said cautiously, "but I should tell you, I'm not very strong. I can't do heavy labor." "I'm not asking for heavy labor. I'm asking for company and partnership in the work of living." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been alone up here for a long time, Miss Lane. Too long, maybe. I forgot what it's like to have another person around, to share the burden of daily life. If you decide you want to leave, I'll take you to the next town, give you enough money to start fresh somewhere else. But if you want to stay, you're welcome here." "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you want someone like me here?" Elias looked up then, meeting her eyes directly. "Someone like you? You mean someone brave enough to survive hell? Someone strong enough to smile through torture? I've known soldiers with less courage than you showed in that cage." Tears sprang to Maribel's eyes. No one had ever called her brave before. Stupid, maybe. Ugly, certainly. Pig, cow, whale. She'd heard every variation, but never brave. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just decide what you want." Elias stood and carried his bowl to the wash basin. "I'm going to check the trap line. Should be back by afternoon. Make yourself at home." After he left, Maribel sat in the quiet cabin, processing everything. She walked around the main room, examining the books on the shelves, volumes on tracking, plant identification, survival skills, but also poetry, philosophy, and novels. A man of contradictions, this Elias Crow. She found herself drawn to a tintype photograph on the mantel, partially hidden behind a lamp. It showed a younger Elias, without the scar, smiling broadly with his arm around a pretty woman holding an infant. The happiness radiating from the image was almost painful to witness. Where were they now, this woman and child? The nightgown Maribel had worn, had it belonged to the woman in the photograph? And why did Elias live alone in the mountains, wearing his scar like a badge of penance? Everyone had ghosts, he'd said. Clearly, his haunted him still. Maribel spent the day exploring her new surroundings. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. Behind it, the mountain rose steeply toward snow-capped peaks. A stream gurgled nearby, crystal clear and cold. The vegetable garden needed weeding, and the chicken coop wanted cleaning. Small tasks, manageable tasks, the kind of honest work she'd been denied for so long. She started with the garden, pulling weeds and finding a strange satisfaction in the simple act. Her hands, soft from months of inactivity, quickly blistered, but she didn't stop. For the first time since her capture, she felt useful. When Elias returned near dusk, he found her attempting to repair a hole in the chicken coop fence, her dress dirty and her hair falling loose from its pins. "You didn't have to start working today," he said. "I meant for you to rest." "I wanted to," Maribel replied. "I need to feel useful. I need to remember that I'm more than what they made me." Elias nodded slowly. "Tomorrow we'll ride down to the trading post. Get you some proper clothing, some supplies of your own. I don't have any money." "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said with a ghost of a smile. "Can't have my only employee dressed in rags." That night, as Maribel lay in her small bed, she realized that for the first time in years, she felt something close to hope. The weeks passed in a rhythm of seasons and survival. Autumn deepened into early winter, and Maribel learned the ways of mountain living. Elias proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to recognize edible plants, how to fish in the cold stream, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead. He never touched her unnecessarily, never looked at her with anything but respect. When she caught him watching her sometimes, there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not pity, but perhaps recognition. As if he saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it meant to survive. Maribel found herself watching him in return. She noticed how gently he handled the chickens, how he talked to Buck as if the horse could understand him, how he spent hours carving small wooden animals that he claimed were just something to do with my hands. She noticed the way sadness sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was looking, and how he always slept with a rifle within reach, as if expecting attack even here in his mountain sanctuary. The real transformation began on a cold November morning when Maribel woke to find fresh wildflowers on her doorstep. The last blooms before winter killed everything. There was no note, but she knew they came from Elias. She'd seen him gathering herbs the day before near where those particular flowers grew. She arranged them in a tin cup by her window, touched beyond words. The next day, she stayed up late into the night, mending his winter coat by lamplight. The seams had split in several places, and she had some skill with a needle from her youth. Her stitches weren't perfect. Her fingers remembered clumsiness more than craft, but she did her best. She left the coat draped over his chair before retiring to bed. In the morning, she found him wearing it, and though he said nothing, she caught him examining the mended seams with something like wonder. They began leaving small gifts for each other. He carved her a wooden comb to replace the broken one she'd arrived with. She baked bread using a recipe her mother had taught her long ago, before everything went wrong. He left books he thought she'd enjoy on her pillow. She patched his worn shirts. Neither acknowledged what was happening between them, the quiet blooming of something neither dared name. They were two damaged souls, each convinced they didn't deserve happiness, yet unable to stop reaching toward each other in small, tentative ways. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, they sat together by the fire. Elias was carving another wooden animal, a bear this time, and Maribel was reading aloud from a book of poetry he'd given her. Her voice had grown stronger in the weeks since leaving the carnival, no longer hoarse and uncertain. "That's beautiful," Elias said when she finished a particularly moving passage. "You read well." "My father was a school teacher," Maribel said, then stopped, surprised at herself. She rarely spoke of her past. "Before he died, he used to read to me every night." "How did he die?" "Cholera, when I was 14. My mother had already passed from the same disease 2 years earlier. I was sent to live with an aunt who didn't want me. She made that very clear." Maribel set the book aside, staring into the fire. "She said I was a burden, that no man would ever want me because I was too fat, too plain, too everything wrong. She said I should be grateful she took me in at all." Elias's jaw tightened. "Your aunt was a fool and a cruel woman. She was honest," Maribel said bitterly. "I've had a lifetime of people confirming her assessment. The carnival was just the culmination of what I'd always known about myself." "And what's that?" "That I'm unlovable, that my body is something to be mocked, that my existence is a joke other people get to laugh at." Elias set down his carving and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Maribel. You're not a pig. You're not a freak. You're not any of the terrible things they called you. You're a woman who survived something that would have broken most people. You're brave and kind and stronger than you know. And anyone who can't see that is blind." Tears streamed down Maribel's face. "You don't have to say kind things just to make me feel better." "I'm not saying kind things. I'm saying true things." He reached out as if to take her hand, then thought better of it, letting his own hand drop. "I know what it's like to believe you're beyond redemption, to wake up every morning knowing you failed the people who mattered most." "What happened?" Maribel asked softly. "The woman and baby in the photograph." Elias flinched as if struck, but after a long silence he began to speak. His voice was low and rough with old pain. "Her name was Clara. We married young, built a life together in a valley about 30 miles from here. She gave me a son, Thomas. He was 3 years old with his mother's laugh and my stubborn streak." He paused, gathering himself. "I was a tracker for the army back then, often away for days at a time. I should have been home. I should have protected them. But I was chasing outlaws for money, for glory, for everything that didn't matter." "What happened?" Maribel breathed. "The Wild Brothers gang came through while I was gone. They were looking for valuables, found Clara and Thomas instead. I came home to find our cabin burned, my wife and son—" He couldn't finish. "They shot Clara trying to protect Thomas. The boy died from the smoke, from fear. He was just 3 years old." "Oh, Elias," Maribel whispered, "I'm so sorry. I hunted the Wild Brothers for 2 years, killed them all except the youngest, who was hanged by the law before I could get to him. Then I came here, to this mountain, and I carved this scar into my face so I'd never forget." He traced the line from temple to jaw. "Every morning I see it in the mirror and remember that I'm the man who failed to save his family." "It wasn't your fault," Maribel said fiercely. "You couldn't have known." "I should have been there. That's what husbands and fathers do. They protect their families. I failed at the only job that mattered." They sat in silence, two broken people bound by their shared conviction that they didn't deserve happiness. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in white. Finally, Maribel said quietly, "You saved me. That counts for something." "Does it?" Elias asked. "Or did I just give myself another person to fail?" The question hung between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Winter settled over Black Peak Mountain with brutal intensity. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in its bucket overnight. Maribel and Elias fell into easy partnership, working together to keep the fire going, tend to the animals, and ensure their supplies would last until spring. But something was changing between them, a tension neither could ignore. Maribel caught herself watching Elias as he worked, the strength in his arms as he split wood, the careful way he tended injured animals, the rare smile that transformed his scarred face. She'd begun to care for him, this damaged mountain man who'd saved her from hell, and the realization terrified her. She couldn't love him. She couldn't love anyone. She was broken, unworthy, a joke that had learned to walk and talk. What could she possibly offer a man like Elias? Elias, for his part, felt similar turmoil. He'd started to look forward to Maribel's presence, the sound of her voice reading in the evenings, her terrible attempts at cooking that always made him smile, the way she hummed while working in the garden. He'd catch sight of her feeding the chickens, snow dusting her hair like diamonds, and feel something he thought had died with Clara. But he had no right to these feelings. He was a man who'd failed at protecting those he loved. How could he risk Maribel's safety by allowing her close to his cursed heart? The crisis came on a bitter January night, when howling wind warned of a massive storm approaching. Elias had been checking the barn's structural integrity, ensuring the animals would survive the coming blizzard, when he heard Maribel scream. He ran back to the cabin to find her standing at the window, pointing into the gathering darkness. "There's someone out there! I saw a man!" Elias grabbed his rifle and peered out. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow. Then, barely visible at the tree line, he spotted them. 3 figures on horseback, wearing the distinctive coats of carnival workers. His blood ran cold. "They've come for you," he said grimly. "They shouldn't have been able to track us here, not in winter, not after this long. Someone must have talked." "What do we do?" Maribel's voice shook with terror. "Bar the door, get down low, and no matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you." "Where are you going?" "To make sure they understand this is my land now, and you're under my protection." Before she could protest, Elias was out the door, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades surviving in harsh conditions. He positioned himself behind the woodpile, rifle ready, and waited. The 3 riders approached slowly, made cautious by the storm and the unknown terrain. One of them shouted over the wind, "We know she's in there. Blackwood wants his property back. Send her out, and nobody needs to get hurt." "She's not property," Elias called back, "and she's not going anywhere. Leave now while you still can." The response was gunfire. Bullets thudded into the woodpile as Elias ducked low. He returned fire, deliberately aiming to wound rather than kill. One rider cried out and fell from his horse. The other 2 scattered, taking cover behind trees. Inside the cabin, Maribel huddled by the fireplace, tears streaming down her face. She'd brought this danger to Elias's door. Her presence had turned his sanctuary into a battleground. Everything she touched, she destroyed. The standoff continued for nearly an hour. The storm grew worse, and the carnival workers realized they were outmatched. Elias knew this land. He could move through the snow like a ghost while they floundered. One by one, he wounded them, nothing fatal, but enough to convince them that pursuing this fight would cost their lives. Finally, They retreated, dragging their wounded companion onto his horse and fleeing back down the mountain. Elias waited, rifle still ready, until he was certain they were gone. Then he trudged back through the deepening snow to the cabin. His hand shook as he barred the door, not from cold, but from the realization of how close he'd come to losing Maribel. He found her exactly where he'd left her, curled against the fireplace, sobbing quietly. "They're gone," he said. "You're safe." "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. I brought this to your home. You could have been killed because of me. I should never have come here. I ruined everything." "Stop." Elias knelt beside her, his voice fierce. "You didn't bring this. They did. Evil men who traffic in human suffering. This isn't your fault. But you could have died." "And I would have counted it worth it," Elias said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Do you understand? Protecting you is worth any risk." Maribel looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes wide with shock. "Why? Why would you say that?" The truth erupted from him before he could stop it. "Because I love you, damn it. Because somewhere in these past months, you became the reason I wake up in the morning. Because your laughter drives away the ghosts that have haunted me for 15 years. Because when I look at you, I don't see what the world told you to see. I see courage and strength and beauty and everything good I thought I'd lost forever." "You can't love me," Maribel whispered. "You're what? Not perfect by some ridiculous standard? Maribel, you're perfect to me. Your body, your face, your soul, all of it. I love all of it. I love you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. God help me, I love you too, Elias. But I'm terrified. Everyone I've ever loved has left me. Everyone I've ever trusted has hurt me. How do I believe this is real?" "The same way I'm learning to believe I deserve a second chance," Elias said. "We take it one day at a time. We choose to trust despite our fear. His words were cut off as Maribel launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and burying her face in his shoulder. He held her carefully at first, then more tightly, as if she might vanish if he didn't hold on. They stayed that way for a long time, two damaged souls clinging to each other while the storm raged outside. The storm lasted 3 days, burying the mountain under several feet of snow. Maribel and Elias were trapped inside the cabin, but neither minded. They spent the time learning each other's stories, filling in the gaps that silence had created. Maribel told him about her childhood before her parents died, about being a happy, chubby girl who loved books and dreamed of becoming a teacher like her father. She described the slow erosion of her self-worth under her aunt's constant criticism, the cruel boys who mocked her in the streets, the employer who'd harassed her until she quit. She told him about Samuel, the young man who'd courted her briefly in Sacramento. She thought he genuinely cared for her, had dared to hope for love. Then she'd overheard him laughing with his friends about how he'd made a bet that he could court the fat girl for a whole month without vomiting. The humiliation had driven her to accept the job offer from a stranger, the stranger who delivered her to the carnival. Elias listened to all of it, his expression darkening with anger on her behalf. When she finished, he took her hand gently. "I wish I could go back and protect the girl you were," he said, "but I can promise to protect the woman you've become." He told her more about Clara and Thomas, not just their deaths, but their lives. He described Clara's love of wild flowers, Thomas's fascination with bugs and small creatures, the simple happiness of their life together. He explained how guilt had driven him into the wilderness, how he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve human connection. "But then you came along," he said, "and you reminded me that isolation isn't strength. It's just another kind of cage." On the fourth day, when the storm finally broke, they emerged from the cabin to find a world transformed by snow. The sun blazed off the white landscape, momentarily blinding in its brilliance. Maribel laughed with pure joy at the beauty of it, and Elias realized he'd never heard that sound from her before, true, unburdened laughter. "Let's build a snowman," she said suddenly. "A what?" "A snowman. Haven't you ever made one? Oh, you're in for a treat." They spent the afternoon like children, rolling snow into massive balls, stacking them into a roughly humanoid shape. Maribel found stones for the eyes and buttons, and Elias carved a carrot from their stores into a nose. When they finished, they stood back to admire their work, arms around each other. "He's beautiful," Maribel declared. "We should name him." "How about Thomas?" Elias said softly. Maribel looked up at him, understanding the significance. "Thomas is perfect." That night, as they sat by the fire, Elias said quietly, "Marry me." Maribel's heart jumped. "What?" "Marry me, Maribel. I know it's quick. I know we're both broken in our own ways, but I don't want to waste any more time. I've already lost too many years to grief and guilt. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." "I don't need marriage to be happy," Maribel said carefully. "I'm happy just being here with you." "I know, but I want everyone, every person in every town from here to Sacramento, to know that you're mine and I'm yours. I want legal protection for you if anything happens to me. I want to stand before God and anyone else listening and proclaim that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." He took both her hands in his. "I want to marry you because I love you and because I want the whole world to know it." Tears spilled down Maribel's cheeks, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married 3 weeks later, on a clear February morning. A circuit-riding minister happened through Blackwater Ridge, and they convinced him to make the trek up to the cabin. The ceremony was simple. Maribel wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Elias had purchased from the trading post, a simple blue cotton that she thought made her look almost pretty. Elias wore his best shirt, the one she'd mended so carefully months before. They spoke their vows under the snow-laden pines with Buck and the chickens as witnesses. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elias kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious and fragile. "You're beautiful," he whispered against her lips. "You've always been beautiful." And for the first time in her life, Maribel believed it. A year later, Maribel woke to the sound of a baby crying. She smiled sleepily, rising from the bed she now shared with Elias to check on their daughter. Little Clara Hope Crow was 6 months old, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's honey-brown hair. She was a chubby, healthy baby who smiled easily and laughed often, everything her parents had once thought they didn't deserve. "Good morning, my sweet girl," Maribel cooed, lifting Clara from her cradle. "Are you hungry?" Elias appeared in the doorway, his hair still mussed from sleep, a smile on his scarred face. "How are my girls this morning?" "Perfect," Maribel said, and meant it. They'd learned to be happy. It hadn't been easy, Both still struggled with moments of doubt and darkness, but they'd learned to fight through those moments together, to remind each other that they deserved the love they'd found. The cabin had grown too. Elias had added a room for Clara and expanded the main living area. The vegetable garden flourished under Maribel's care, and they'd acquired 2 goats to supplement Buck and the chickens. They'd even made friends with a few hardy souls who lived in the region. A prospector named Jim who stopped by occasionally for coffee. A Ute woman named Nasha who taught Maribel about medicinal plants. Their isolation wasn't as complete as it once had been, but they still treasured the peace of the mountain. One spring afternoon, as Maribel worked in the garden with Clara strapped to her back, Elias rode up on Buck with supplies from the trading post. His expression was troubled. "What's wrong?" Maribel asked immediately. "Saw a poster in town," he said, dismounting. "The carnival passed through Blackwater Ridge last week. Blackwood's dead, shot by one of his own workers in a dispute over money. The whole operation fell apart." "Good," Maribel said fiercely. "He deserved worse." "There's more. Some of the performers were freed when it dissolved. One of them, a woman they'd kept as a mermaid. She's looking for work, looking for safety. Jim suggested I mention it to you, see if you'd want to—" "Invite her here?" Maribel finished. "To stay with us?" Elias nodded. "I know it's a lot to ask. This is our sanctuary, but I keep thinking about how you had nowhere to go, how I could give you freedom. Maybe we could do the same for her?" Maribel looked at the cabin, at the life they'd built, at her sleeping daughter. She thought about the woman in the cage she'd been, about the despair and hopelessness that had nearly consumed her. She thought about the man who'd offered her freedom when she'd believed she'd lost everything. "Yes," she said, "tell her she has a home here for as long as she needs." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Maribel leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for loving me, for giving me a life I never thought I'd have." Elias kissed the top of her head. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a reason to live again. You and Clara. You're my second chance." "We're each other's second chance," Maribel corrected. Clara stirred in her mother's arms, making small, contented sounds. Elias reached over to touch his daughter's tiny hand, and she gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Do you think she'll ever understand?" Maribel asked. "How much she means to us, how she represents everything we survived to find each other?" "Maybe not in words," Elias said, "but we'll show her every day. We'll teach her that she's loved, that she's worthy, that she's beautiful just as she is. We'll make sure she never doubts her value the way we did. Promise?" "Promise." They sat together as darkness fell over Black Peak Mountain, a family forged from pain and loss but defined by love and hope. Behind them, lamplight spilled from the cabin windows, warm and welcoming. Above them, stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to a story as old as time. 2 broken souls who found each other and chose, against all odds, to become whole. In the distance, a wolf howled, but the sound no longer frightened Maribel. This was her home now, her mountain, her life. She'd been caged once, mocked and degraded, told she was less than human. But she'd been wrong about herself just as the world had been wrong about her. She wasn't a pig, she wasn't a freak, she wasn't unlovable or worthless. She was Maribel Crowe, wife, mother, survivor. She was beautiful. She was brave, She was loved, and that, she thought, as she held her daughter close and felt her husband's arm around her shoulders, was everything.